Hey true believers, sorry to report that I've been pretty ill this past week, and at the time of recording I still am, and so I wasn't able to finish the video I had planned, but I didn't want to leave you all high and dry, so rather than upload nothing this week, I decided to put together my videos about the original Human Torch, originally presented in 2 parts in 2019, and re-upload them as one video. If you haven't seen them already, I hope you enjoy, and we should be back on schedule next week.
First off, let me begin by saying that the story of the Human Torch and Toro is one that's been retold and retconned many times over the decades. As such, many details have changed and some aspects have been inconsistent. That being said, this video is my best attempt at taking the various conflicting tellings and arranging them into one cohesive narrative. And so with that, this week's episode begins in the 1930s with Professor Phineas Horton. Horton was a scientist decades ahead of his time. His goal was nothing less than the creation of a synthetic man, an artificial human being, the world's first android. To further this goal, Horton employed several lab assistants in the development of synthetic material now known as Horton cells, including an expert in flame-proofing named Fred Raymond. However, due to his previous work with asbestos, Fred fell ill and soon left Horton's employ. After that, Raymond fell in love and married a woman named Nora Jones, who was in fact another scientist that had previously worked for Norton. Together, Fred and Nora Raymond had a son named Thomas, who they nicknamed Toro. Unfortunately, it seemed unlikely that either parent would see Thomas reach adulthood, as Nora was also sick due to her earlier experiments involving radium. Meanwhile, Phineas Horton continued working on his android, and eventually succeeded in constructing a man made completely of artificial cells. And so, in November of 1939, Horton unveiled his synthetic man to the world. However, Horton also revealed that during the android's creation, an unexpected side effect of the Horton cells manifested. When exposed to oxygen, Horton's android would burst into living flame. And so, the world was introduced to the Human Torch. Horton's colleagues were less thrilled than he about his creation, however. They saw the torch as far too dangerous and felt it should be destroyed. When Horton refused, his detractors decided to go to the press. The resulting public outcry forced Horton to seal away his creation. He encased the torch within a metal shell and entombed it within a large block of concrete. It seems, though, that Horton did not intend for this to be the end of the Human Torch, for while entombed, the android was hooked up to a device which fed him information. Not only was the torch educated in the basics of language and culture, but he also received news reports informing him of the growing menace overseas. It also seems that the torch's concrete prison was not as airtight as intended, and a tiny crack formed in the block. Over the following weeks, the crack resulted in a leak, allowing small amounts of oxygen to trickle in. Then one day, the building flame and pressure inside resulted in an explosion, destroying the concrete and freeing the Human Torch. Disoriented and confused, the torch ran through the streets, although he didn't know where he was running. The fire department was dispatched, but their water had little effect on the flaming android. Realizing the damage he was causing, the Human Torch fled, searching for a way to extinguish himself. He soon came across a large estate with its own pool. Burning his way through the iron gate, the torch dove into the pool, giving himself respite from the burning destruction. However, the property he was on belonged to a racketeer named Sardo, who had been paying attention to the news stories about the Flaming Man. When Sardo's men informed him of the grass burning around the pool, he deduced the cause and ordered the glass cover over the pool be closed. Upon investigating, the gangsters found the Human Torch immobile in the water, having gone into some kind of stasis after extinguishing his own flame. Sardo decided to take advantage of the situation by using the torch as a pawn in his protection racket. After sealing the android in a glass tube, he brought the torch to a warehouse whose owners refused to pay up. The torch, naive and barely conscious, assumed Sardo was helping him in some way. And so when Sardo freed the artificial man by smashing the glass tube and running off, the torch was disoriented and confused. His flame returned as he stumbled around the warehouse, setting fire to everything inside. Slowly coming to his senses, the torch's artificial brain began putting the pieces together. Figuring out he'd been used by Sardo, the torch leapt out of the burning building, discovering in the process his power of flight. He returned to Sardo's home in a rage, attacking his men and pursuing the villainous racketeer. The torch tracked down and confronted Sardo in his underground lab. While the gangster's bullets had no effect on the Human Torch, a canister of nitro gas sprang a leak and shot up at the flaming android. For a few moments, this gas gave the torch the ability to rescind his flame. Sardo attempted to use the remaining canister as a bargaining chip, but the torch decided to simply take it for himself. The desperate gangster then attempted to rid himself of his flaming opponent by tossing a container of sulfuric acid at him. However, the heat caused the tank to rupture in mid-air, the explosion killing Sardo in the process. After leaving the burning building with his new ability to flame off, the torch turned himself over to the police. Since the so-called Human Torch was not truly human by any legal sense of the word, Horton was able to convince the police to return him as his rightful property. When Horton returned home with his android, he realized he could use the newfound ability to control his flame to make a fortune. The torch, however, refused to be used again and shot off into the night, accidentally setting fire to Horton's home as he left. Initially, Horton was thought to have perished in the blaze, but was soon found alive in the wreckage. After this, the torch attempted to make himself useful to society by taking the name Jim Hammond and becoming a police officer. With superpowered threats such as the Submariner beginning to emerge, the police chief was willing to bend the rules to have his own superhero on the force. Sure enough, the Human Torch and the Submariner did end up butting heads when Hammond was sent to stop one of Namor's rampages. History would remember this battle as the first great clash of superpowered opponents. However, in the end, the battle ended in a draw, and a truce was forged between the warriors of fire and water. Sometime after this bout, Hammond became lonely as the world's only android and returned to Professor Horton. Jim confessed his loneliness, and Horton told him about his old colleague Fred Raymond. He implied that his creation may not be as alone as he thought, and that he should ask Raymond about his son. Around this time, the Torch met a new threat in the form of the Asbestos Lady. He first encountered her when the Asbestos Lady attempted to force Fred Raymond into joining her gang. The Human Torch arrived on the scene to rescue the Raymonds, but the villainess escaped in the scuffle. This is where Jim Hammond was first introduced to Fred's son, Thomas Raymond, otherwise known as Toro. Apparently, all his life, Thomas was completely immune to the damaging effects of heat and fire. His mother, Nora, hypothesized that this was because he was a mutant, but it was later discovered that Toro's power came from a recessive inhuman gene. Furthermore, it seems that Nora was exposed to Horton cells during her time working for the professor, and she had somehow passed on these cells to her son. When the Human Torch was nearby, his presence caused the Horton cells in Tom's body to react. Hammond flew off, staying away from the young boy, but he kept tabs on him and his family. Sometime later, tragedy struck the Raymonds when the family boarded a train bound for the countryside. During this trip, the Asbestos Lady had her revenge on Fred Raymond for denying her when she caused a massive tree trunk to fall onto the tracks, resulting in a horrible crash. Miraculously, young Toro survived the crash unscathed, but his parents weren't so lucky. The child fainted, but he was recovered by members of a nearby circus, who quickly discovered his immunity to flame. The circus folk took Toro in, using his talents in their fire-eating show, planning to look after him until they were able to locate his family. Sometime later, while listening to the radio, Jim heard about Toro, the amazing fire-eating boy, and knew who it had to be. He suspected that the asbestos lady would go after him to finish what she started. His hunch proved correct, and the Human Torch attacked the asbestos lady's gang on their way to the circus. The villainess attempted to escape once more, but the torch melted the asphalt beneath her feet, trapping her and leaving the asbestos lady for the police. Then, when the torch traveled to the circus to meet up with Toro, his presence triggered the boy's own fire powers, allowing him to flame on for the first time. This time, the torch stayed with Toro, teaching him to harness and use his powers the same way he could. And so, Jim Hammond became Thomas Raymond's legal guardian, and the two became partners in danger and good friends. Of course, the American android and his young sidekick would be drawn into a much larger conflict later that year after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the United States induction into the Second World War. The flaming duo joined forces with Captain America and Bucky, as well as their former enemy Namor, the Submariner, to form the Invaders, and battled the soldiers and supervillains of the Axis powers. The Invaders fought together for several years until one fateful day in April of 1945. The team was split up and each of the heroes was assigned to an important duty. Captain America and Bucky were sent to guard a top-secret prototype drone plane. This was in fact the mission that ended with both Cap and Bucky being missing and presumed dead after the drone plane was hijacked by the villainous Baron Zemo. Meanwhile, Namor was stationed on the Pacific to defend America's shores against the Japanese naval and kamikaze forces. And Jim and Toro were given possibly the most important mission of all. They were to infiltrate Nazi Germany and capture Adolf Hitler alive. On April 30th of 1945, at the height of the Soviet Union's siege on Berlin, the two fire-powered heroes made their way into the heart of the German capital. Having lost, Hitler decided to end his own life, rather than fall into the hands of the Russians. However, moments before he could pull the trigger, the Human Torch and Toro burned their way into his underground bunker. Refusing to become a prisoner, Hitler rushed to an emergency button that would have destroyed Berlin and everyone in it, Russian, German, and android alike. At least that's what would have happened had the Human Torch not prevented it by immolating the mad dictator himself. With his dying breath, Adolf Hitler commanded his death be reported a suicide. Although he would later return thanks to the cloning technology of Arnim Zola, for now at least, the Fuhrer was dead. The Human Torch and Toro returned to the United States and the Invaders reunited, albeit with a replacement Captain America and Bucky. In addition, while their British allies Union Jack and Spitfire remained in Europe, the Invaders' forces were bolstered by the addition of Miss America and the Whizzer. Then, later that year, after Japan's surrender and the end of World War II, President Truman renamed the group to the All-Winner Squad. Even after the dissolution of that group, the Human Torch and Toro continued to battle evil until one day in 1949. The pair went up against a man known only as the Crime Boss, the leader of the aptly named crime syndicate. It seems the Crime Boss was prepared for the fiery duo, for he had in his possession a chemical called Solution XR that could douse even their flame. After rendering the two heroes immobile, the criminals sold Tom Raymond to the Russians and buried Jim Hammond's lifeless form in the Nevada desert. There, the Human Torch remained for 4 years, until a nearby explosion from a nuclear test awakened him. The atomic fire not only revived the Torch, but made him more powerful than ever. He attacked the crime syndicate again, and this time their special solution had little effect. After defeating the crime boss, the Torch learned of Toro's fate and rushed off to find him. He discovered that his old partner had been the victim of communist brainwashing, and the two fought a fiery battle in the skies over Korea. With his enhanced powers, the Human Torch was victorious, and he brought Toro back to America for treatment. However, he soon learned that the daughter of Police Chief Wilson, the man who had given him the opportunity to become an officer all those years earlier, had been kidnapped by the remaining members of the crime syndicate, including a man called the Butcher. In exchange for her safety, the criminals wanted the unconditional surrender of the Human Torch. Jim volunteered to do so and placed himself in the steel casket the Butcher had prepared for him. Then, the casket was sealed and the Human Torch was dropped into the ocean. However, before long, he was rescued by none other than Toro, who had fully come to his senses. On that day in 1953, the Human Torch and Toro were reunited to continue their war against evil and injustice. However, all good things must eventually end, and one day in 1955 the Torch's flame began to burn hotter than ever before. Hammond realized that the atomic fire he'd been exposed to earlier was growing out of control within him. He had no choice but to seal himself away from the world until the uncontrollable flame exhausted itself. In yet another act of self-sacrifice, the Torch plunged himself deep into the earth, deactivating himself in the process. There he slept for decades, until finally, the Marvel Age of Heroes. The Torch was discovered and reactivated by the Mad Thinker, a villainous enemy of the Fantastic Four, including, of course, Johnny Storm, the Torch's modern namesake. Having temporarily lost most of his memories, the last thing the Torch recalled was breaking free of the concrete prison Professor Horton had sealed him in. And so, the Thinker was able to manipulate Jim Hammond into attacking Johnny Storm, and the Human Torches of two generations clashed. However, the original Torch's heroic nature burned through, and he joined forces with the Fantastic Four in their assault on the Mad Thinker. The Thinker escaped, but not before deactivating the android Human Torch, leaving him ostensibly dead once more. Out of respect for the origins of the fallen hero, the Fantastic Four decided to leave the lifeless body of the Human Torch there in the abandoned lab. There he remained until the killer robot known as Ultron 5 accosted the Mad Thinker and demanded he provide him with an android. The Thinker gave Ultron the location of his abandoned lab, and with it the body of the original Human Torch. Then, after capturing the Torch's creator, Professor Phineas Horton, Ultron completely revamped Jim Hammond's lifeless body, using it as a basis to create the synthezoid known as the Vision. So, this should be the end, right? The Human Torch died, and his body was used in the creation of the Vision. Well, that certainly would have been the end of Jim Hammond if not for the intervention of Immortus, the so-called Master of Time. As part of one of his many schemes to manipulate the time stream, Immortus used an object known as the Forever Crystal to create a chronal duplicate of the Human Torch. For a brief time, there were two Jim Hammonds, the copy created by Immortus that became the Vision, and the original which remained in the Mad Thinker's lab. The Thinker discovered the remaining Torch and decided to use him yet again. Toro Raymond, now older and married, heard of the Torch's return and subsequent death. He attended a memorial service that was announced in the local papers, but none of Hammond's old allies were in attendance. This, it turns out, is because the funeral was a ruse staged by the Mad Thinker with the aid of his evil ally, the Puppet Master, as a way to lure in Toro. After leaving the cemetery, Raymond was drugged and captured by the Mad Thinker. Then, the Thinker brainwashed the former hero into believing he was in fact the android Human Torch, and sent him off to battle his former foe, the Submariner. However, during the fight, Toro came to his senses and his memories returned. The two heroes went after the Mad Thinker, who attempted to escape in a rocket ship. However, Toro was determined to avenge his old partner and forced the Thinker's ship to crash into a volcano, sacrificing his own life to stop the villain. While the Thinker survived the explosion, Toro did not, and his widow, Anne Raymond, went looking for answers. While she found no trace of her husband, when she returned home she found Namor, the Submariner, there waiting for her, and the two pieced what had happened together. Then, some time later, questions were raised about the Vision's origin when he was captured and vivisected by a coalition of various governments. Despite all previous evidence pointing towards the Vision being a rebuilt Human Torch, the now elderly Phineas Horton determined that he was not the same individual. While we now know that this was due to the interference of Immortus, Anne Raymond hoped that the man who died battling the Mad Thinker was in fact Jim Hammond and not her husband. She went to the Avengers West Coast Division, which the Vision was a member of, looking for closure. The West Coast Avengers traveled to the cemetery where the torch was supposedly buried before Toro's death. Sure enough, they found his grave, confirming that neither the body used to create the Vision nor the man who died fighting the Thinker were the real Jim Hammond. This was, of course, assuming that the body in the grave was in fact the genuine article. Any doubt of this was removed when the Scarlet Witch decided to take matters into her own hands by using her chaos magic to reactivate the dormant android. A plume of fire shot forth and Jim Hammond emerged from his grave. The first Human Torch lived again. He was not the only one to return as well, and later, during a time-traveling adventure involving the Avengers and the Invaders, Bucky Barnes briefly got his hand on a powerful artifact known as the Cosmic Cube. In that moment, Bucky used the reality-altering powers of the cube to return Toro Raymond to life. Unfortunately, by the time this happened, Toro's wife had moved on. In any event, both flaming heroes of World War II were alive once more. They both moved forward, wanting to live in peace and find their place in the world. Of course, whenever he was needed, the Human Torch would answer the call and join the fight against evil.
That's all I've got for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, share the video, and subscribe for more Marvelous content. Be sure to leave a comment letting me know what Marvel hero or villain you'd like to hear about next, and as always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below, along with other places you can find me, including my Patreon page, where for only $1 a month you can get your name in these special thanks here. So until next time, true believers, Excelsior!